Entering the studio, Robert Zimmerman, George Zimmerman's brother.
Gentlemen, how you doing, man? Pleasure. Oh no! Robert's lawyer, of course. How you doing?
Hey, man.
Just a slobble on E-Rock.
We're on. How are you?
Yeah, we're right on the air.
How are you?
Great.
Sure.
What's up, Robert? Opie over here. How are you, buddy?
I call you Opie. How are you, sir?
Opie.
Mr. Kumia.
Yes, how you doing, man?
Very
Pleasure
well.
to meet you, finally.
Pleasure to meet you.
When are you going back to Florida today?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah, my spot on CNN got bumped.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, it definitely did.
Uh-huh. Was that a political reason, or?
No, I think he just did one of those live audience shows, and the audience took a lot of time to ask very simple questions.
I gotcha. Yeah. So what's going on? Anything happening in court today?
Yeah, I'm
Still jury selection?
still jury selection. The Fry hearing has not concluded, so there's not a conclusive decision about the expert testimony. And we'll see,
Yeah. That's it was just it's such a chore, like watching these, because it's really a grind. It just seems to, and I'm sure you guys obviously want this resolved as quickly as possible, and then to watch some of this line of questioning going, like, it's so tedious.
It's so tedious. There's a juror consultant, which is, a specialist in selecting jurors, which is just, it's uncanny. But it's, hopefully we get to justice, and hopefully there's a result. I hope the result is respected. That's what I really...
Right. Now, obviously, the emotions attached to this case, a lot of times things like this transcend facts and transcend actual justice. Your concerns about that?
My concerns about that, I don't want to sound overly legal, but there are what are called lesser included offenses and things like that. For example, if you are charged with murder too, you can be convicted with manslaughter or negligent manslaughter. And my concern with that is that sometimes juries don't exist in a vacuum. When you're on jury duty for 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time, somebody notices. Somebody realizes you're not going to work. Somebody realizes you're not walking the dog, or somebody realizes you're not doing whatever you would have been doing, every day. And then, you know how the news is. Is it one of these 30 people? Then is it one of these 10? And we think it might be one of these 8 or whatever. So I think that sometimes in a case like this or others, juries have they have pressure. I think jurors can rise to the occasion, and I believe in the way that our system is set up. But I certainly, as a family member, am concerned that they might have a lot of pressure to do something, as it were.
Right. Something. Right. Now that isn't true justice. That's trying to compromise somebody's legal right.
I don't think it would be a factor, but for the racial element that has been kind of woven into this whole story.
Yes.
Can I ask you what is how frustrating is it to see the media behaving? Because no matter what side of the case the media has been fairly repulsive.
This is some of Robert's biggest complaints on Twitter and stuff, is the way the media has handled this. That's where the bulk of the real anger is, right?
The editing of that audio, regardless, the editing of that audio is unforgivable. Yeah, and it's clear what the intention of it was.
Absolutely. Right. It's been repulsive, and I think one of the things that has happened to me is that I was kind of protesting by myself, but now looking back, I have like a year to look back on of people saying the same thing, and I've been listening to this for a long time, and I'm kind of now just repeating or summarizing what people's frustrations are. It's not just me.
You could go to a cut and paste list of answers to some of these people, because it's the same inaccurate information that and it's been dispelled by a lot of people, yet they don't want to accept that never happened. This is the way it went down. And as all this evidence comes in, especially during the court case, people will still not want to believe it, not even look at it, and they'd rather go off ill-informed because it better fits their emotional response to this whole thing.
Putting fact before emotion is difficult, especially when emotion has been so misinformed for so long. But we'll see what happens.
Have they mischaracterized your brother too? 'Cause, I mean, whenever you see a family member or a friend being talked about publicly, I think it's probably rare that they get it right.
Yeah, I don't think it's only mischaracterized. I think there was kind of this vacuum at the beginning of information. There was kind of like this black hole made around George, and everybody got to fill in their mythological version of George that was not anything like George. But George he's a real person. He met the jurors yesterday in questioning, and I think that's important because they can see that he's not just some news story or some icon on the screen that flashes by with a narrative. He's a real human being.
It is hard to see that a real person. I mean, a lot of people following this case, it's the guy on TV, it's that picture, it's one photograph, and that's your brother. This is your family.
Right. Exactly.
And it's got to be weird too. You're regular citizens. Like, you're not meant to be on the news. Like, you're just a regular dude going to work, and the next thing you know, your brother's in the news, and you're on CNN talking about your brother, who's what a reality shift that. I mean, and Trayvon Martin's family too, I'm sure, has the same thing. All of a sudden, the regular people, this tragedy, and now they're on television, kind of quasi-celebrities talking about what's going on.
Right. I think it's I've characterized it before as a reluctant duty, but it's not just a duty to my brother. I think it's a duty to my country, because I don't want to see people charged with crimes without probable cause simply to appease the masses. I don't think that's the right thing to do, and I think that's what happened here, and I'll continue to be vocal about it each and every time it happens.
And what is what is the exact? You guys you're half Mexican, half white, or whatever. What is your makeup? Because they were going with the white. They could. What's that?
What?
White Hispanic.
White Hispanic.
They could not. I've never heard that term used.
Right.
Until this case, they couldn't get white into it fast enough.
Didn't fit the narrative any other way. They need a white on black crime.
Right.
That's what they wanted. And they heard the name Zimmerman, so they're like, "Oh, okay, this is great." And then you guys turn out to be Hispanic,
right?
And they're like, "Wait a minute, no, let's get rid of that whole part."
Yeah, that irony kind of repeated our whole life of our mom being very Hispanic from Peru. She does not look white. She is not white. So sometimes we'd be in school or at the doctor's office, and they'd say, Mrs. Zimmerman, and she'd get up with her kids, and they'd look at her like, "Oh, this poor lady doesn't speak English," or whatever. And they'd be like, no, we said Mrs. Zimmerman.
Oh, no.
And she's like, yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
That's me. Right, but that's that kind of, it was like the inverse, where now we had that name meant white, right away, and we did not retroactively inject race and say, wait, but we're Hispanic, because I think that's kind of a moot point and kind of draws more.
Truly is, yeah.
What's the other half of the family?
White.
But what? Like German?
German white. Zimmerman. That's where our name comes from.
That's what I figured. It's German. Right. Okay. Just making sure. So half German, half Hispanic.
That's right.
Now, is this I heard this jury is not sequestered?
The pool is not sequestered. The order as it stands, my understanding is that it is not sequestered thus far, though the court may readdress that at some other point. But the jury...
It's such a volatile kind of atmosphere.
There are differences and advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes when you have a sequestered jury, for example, people may figure out that you're just gone, for 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time. When the jury's not sequestered, you can go home and go back to work, as it were, on the jury. So they may not figure out necessarily that you're doing jury duty, and there are, there's advantages and disadvantages. So we'll see how it plays out. But definitely, I would have preferred, just speaking as a family member, the what's called the veneer or the pool to be sequestered, because I think that the objective seemingly is for the jury to have some kind of anonymity. But when you don't have that pool of 500 people sequestered to begin with, I think you lose any real anonymity in reality.
Yeah.
And you're right about one thing, and I've had mixed feelings about this case, to be very honest. Anthony's 100% for your brother, and I've played devil's advocate too, but to be totally honest, I don't know how to feel about it. There's times where I feel like he was wrong, and there's times where I feel like, yeah, man, it's just an unfortunate thing, but he was defending his own life. I don't know how, I think a lot of people don't know how to see this. Like, you only know what's being said from both sides, and it's like, I can't get a definitive 100% opinion on it.
Right.
Again, I think if you look at it emotionally, you're going to have much more of a difficult time assessing what happened and the legality of it. If you do look at it legally and look at the evidence that is being presented, and I think you get more of a line that, yes, here's a man who felt his life was in danger and being threatened to be taken away from him, and defended himself in kind and saved his life. That's the legal part of this. Did that happen?
Right.
Now, emotionally, you could be like, well, was he just a boy with iced tea and Skittles? He's unarmed. Was he this sweet kid? Did Zimmerman, was he walking around like he was the boss of this block or something? All that is this peripheral interference. And I think if you could try to weed that out, you get much more of an accurate depiction of what happened and where this should go when this trial does end.
Well, and it's also hard to get, because when you look at the fact that he had the back of the head injury, and the press just didn't want to show that. So that actually makes me think that Zimmerman's telling more of the truth.
Yeah, neither did seemingly the state, because it took them a long time to get that image produced from a black and white grainy photograph to the actual full color high definition image of what George actually looked like in the back of that police car. Again,
it didn't fit the narrative of first of all, why he was even arrested after, I guess the police that were on the scene and from witnesses that gave their account to the police on the scene, obviously they decided he was justified in what he did. At least maybe a grand jury could look at it or whatnot, but at that time they didn't deem it necessary to arrest him.
And I think that they would have wanted any shred of probable cause to arrest him. I think there were enormous political and other pressures, and I think those people were men and women of honor, that despite the pressure, despite the politics, despite the clamoring, they were faithful to their oath. They said, the law is the law. We arrest with probable cause. And I think Chief Lee, who now doesn't have a job, and everybody else who doesn't have a job now, would have wanted any inkling of probable cause to say, you're under arrest for whatever. For anything, for criminal escalation, let's say, or whatever the case may be. And it just, you don't charge people with crimes in this country, hopefully, and that'll remain the standard because people are concerned about politics or race or whatever. It's
a very explosive racial issue, and I know just from Twitter, discussing the case with you on Twitter, the second you defend your brother and defend him with facts based on the case, based on what the police saw on the scene, based on what witnesses heard and saw, and you defend your brother, you are labeled a racist. It's astounding to me. And that's more offensive than somebody defending your brother based on facts.
Yeah, I call it the crying wolf scenario that we have. It's kind of twofold. It's one that where there is real racism, we should reserve that word for when we have a real glaring example of this is racism and we can't stand for that. But the other side of that is that I think the standard has devolved to where, for example, if you say, hey, Jim, I think you're a thief, it's probably because you stole my eraser, and I've seen you do that 2 or 3 times, or whatever, my stapler, you're always stealing my stapler. So you have to have some grounds for making an accusation. I think now this racist word has become kind of a word you just throw out, and then someone has to retroactively prove that they are not, in fact, a racist. And make a career out of proving, I'm not a racist, and throw their arms up and just go into this whole effort of proving that they're not, and I don't think that's the right standard.
The criteria for being called a racist has changed so much over the years. Now it's, I disagree with someone of color or with a different religious background, whatever it is, you disagree. You are now arguing your point. Now you're a racist.
Although I will say, you make the criteria from 1810 on.
You're an ass.
But you know what? And again, it's back to the press, because I've argued this. I've talked to this. Even I didn't get into it with black comics at the Comedy Cellar, just chatting about it. And and they're very passionate about it. And then you hear what they say. Look, this. And it's these guys aren't lying. That's what they've learned in the press. And a lot of times you hear something like the audio that came out and you don't follow it closely enough to hear the corrected version.
Right.
So a lot of people are going, the media does not correct themselves on the front page.
They're not in the business of correcting themselves.
They do it on page 8, or they do it quietly. Here's the actual audio. They don't come out with the same vigor and correct themselves.
Well, one of the best things I've seen on the news of late, with the various things that have happened, the Boston bombing, when they try to just jump on the story and get a little premature, is the earlier reports had it this way, but this way.
It's
like, wait a minute.
Word, yeah.
You're saying the earlier reports. You were the ones that said it.
Right.
You guys were
Don't
the
make
ones
it
that
sound
pushed
like it was
forward.
this vague information that came into you.
Right.
You jumped the gun and reported it this way.
Right.
And with your brother's case, it's obvious they did the same thing.
Right.
They wanted this to be some type of racial injustice that was going on.
Yeah.
They wanted the reason that this happened was that your brother was obviously a racist, and he was just out to hurt someone of color that night. And looking at the facts, it seems, especially that nothing could be further from the truth.
I think hopefully going forward from this, I mean, we're having this conversation now. There are things that get, like you said, the Boston bombing, and whatnot, that get misreported and earlier reports suggest, as it were,
Yes.
But I don't think we can afford to do that with race. I think race and the word racist or racism need to have a very revered place in light of the civil rights legacy. I think there's a point to respecting what those words actually mean, in our language.
You're taking the sting out of it and the reality out of it if you just throw it on something that is absolutely not racist.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that has to be what comes from this in the end, is that we have to understand that the media acted with incompetence. They took the word of these attorneys, spinning this, who have now proven financial motives in the outcome of this narrative. And they reported their story as fact, and that's the definition of incompetence.
Right.
If you take the word of people who stand to make money or millions from getting people to believe something, that's the very definition of incompetence. So I think when you add race to that, we need to say again, never again after this case.
Yeah. When you see something like justice for Trayvon, and then you say something like, how about justice for George? Again, you're called racist if you say something like that.
Absolutely.
Doesn't just saying justice for Trayvon tip the scales?
I think it's a hard art. I'm not a black man, as you all can see, so it's very hard for me to make this argument sometimes, but I think that our country has the original sin, as it were, of slavery, of racism. And I think that sometimes people, or I should say, racism vis-a-vis slavery, via slavery. And I think that sometimes people are responding emotionally to very straightforward facts. And I think that I can't blame them for feeling the way they do, Jim, when you brought up the tapes, and the editing and whatnot. If you think that the news informs, if you are still that misinformed, that you actually think that the news informs you, and that is how you are informed, that this is what actually happened, I don't have any problem with that. It doesn't help us, but if that's what you really think because that's what you're being told 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I would feel the same way if I were so misinformed. I know my own brother. I know what actually happened, so I don't feel that way. But I think that the challenge is getting people that are reacting emotionally and having emotional commitments to the narrative to start to think intellectually about what actually happened and start kind of divorcing those two elements between the feeling and the fact and getting to the bottom of it.
Very hard to do with
race.
With race
almost
based
impossible.
cases. I mean, you saw a very polarized support basis with the OJ trial, and that's really the last real, huge racial trial in this country, but. You see it here. I mean, there are people. It is so divided on racial lines as to who's supported here, and I think justice should be what is supported here, and the evidence and facts should dictate how you feel about when this trial ends and there is a verdict, how you feel about that verdict should be based on nothing but what did happen.
Right.
And the best of people's ability to present what really did happen and keep that emotion out of it.
Very, very key, because our system is not perfect, but I do believe it's the best in the world, and it kind of is like this filter, right, for what is allowed in and what's not in court,
Yeah.
So emotion doesn't play in court.
No.
Facts do, and
That's what the blindfold's for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that will be, that's why I'm glad that so many members of the public are attending. They're handling that lottery really well.
Right.
I think that the public has to participate to respect the outcome. And I think that, going forward, it should be about justice and not about color. And we should have a reflex after a case like this to whenever somebody brings up race, no matter what the race is, if it's white, if it's, I don't care what the race, or if it's an invented race like white Hispanic, because we'll have other invented races, right? We should throw up a red flag and say, not so fast, and then never again, because it doesn't do us any good to come to these foregone conclusions based on emotion about what may or may not have happened when something is so sensitive and so tragic. It doesn't help us. It's a disservice to us, and it should be about fact.
And there's a day and age with, of course, Twitter, social media. Has anybody been concerned? You're being very vocal in public on Twitter about the case?
After I announced yesterday that after the jury is selected, I was not going to tweet anymore. And
really?
No, not at all.
Has this been on the recommendation of lawyers, or is this just your personal?
No, my attorney personally says that my First Amendment right applies, until the rule of sequestration is invoked. If there is a rule of sequestration, that's a very legal.
Now that's
term
so if you're in court and you're seeing stuff,
you have to get out. And
right,
and you can't talk about it,
sure,
and whatnot. So until that point, I should feel free to take advantage of the First Amendment, is what I've been told.
Now, you've taken some hits with some of your tweets. People have said, oh my God, he's ruining his brother's case, or he's being a racist, he's saying that.
Right.
I guess one of the most controversial ones was comparing one of the killers of the baby.
Right,
to Trayvon in some way, shape, or form. You put two of the pictures together. A little about that. What happened?
I think people who don't want to hear or accept or believe because they have seen images of a 12 or 13-year-old child that this person could have done what he did to George, Mr. Martin, and he could have said what he said to George, and you're going to die tonight, mother effer, and then reach for his gun. They don't want to believe that, but what happened there was kind of similar wording, and it would have gone to that in my mind had George not defended his life in that instant. But I think that Twitter is a wacky world, so I'm going to leave it alone, for the trial, and just let the judicial system take its course.
Now, I'm very close with my own brother. We just talk about anything. A little more the personal connection between you and your brother. Were you close growing up?
Very close.
Very close.
Very close.
So now, are you able to speak with him just as a brother? Just sit down and hey, how are you?
I think it's funny because I think people assume that I have ever had a conversation with him about this case, and I had like maybe 2 or 3 conversations way back in the beginning. But I think that's very telling because it was his idea to be forthright and forthcoming with his family, like he was with the police, and everything else. But aside from that, I think when people have something to hide, they're shady, they're mysterious, they kind of withdraw. And I remember when I found out that my little sister called me actually, and she said, somebody died, and I was like, oh my God, somebody died. Our dad had just gotten out of the hospital. I thought he had died.
Oh wow.
And she said, no, it's not Dad, but George will call you and he'll tell you what happened. And then he did. So I think that despite the controversy, coming out and being so honest and open about something very tragic says a lot about his character. I don't think that people who are hiding things or criminals or have mixed feelings about what they did would be so forthcoming, and he was, and I'm glad he told his family at the time, and he told everybody the consistent story.
Yeah. Wow. So you do get to talk to him, though, just like, how are you, kind of a thing?
From time to time, and this case has never come. I mean, it's been like 15 or 14
Jimmy's
months.
freaking out. Jimmy's freaking out.
What's going
Where's
on?
Ozzy?
He's ready in the lobby waiting.
Oh, okay. Well,
I want to. No,
Jimmy loses his mind.
but I don't want to ask him to leave because what you're saying is fascinating. Can we? Is it possible we can? Can you
go
guys
back
hang for a bit.
Oh, I can hang. I have to do Fox News at
And watch.
Fox News at 10?
Can we bring Ozzy and Geezer and you guys can hang out and watch them? Because they only have a few minutes. I don't want to end this because you're very interesting.
I also want to, I want to ask you a couple more questions after Ozzy, and also want to get out the information on how, people could support your brother and the case and whatnot. Get that website out there. What is that actually?
It's called GZDefenseFund.com.
GZDefenseFund.com.
Right. And
it's very easy. There's a link right on there. You can use PayPal or whatever, and just this is it's a bigger issue than just George and Trayvon. This is
correct.
This is an issue of someone's right to defend themselves. It's an issue of finding out what really happened,
right.
And people having a fair trial. So I absolutely support your brother in this, and hang out for a little while.
We see you on the couch and you come back.
We got
Ozzy last minute. So
you can watch Jimmy fawn over Ozzy. It's fascinating. We obviously we have Robert Zimmerman, George Zimmerman's brother. He's George is on trial. He's down in Florida. They're doing jury selection and stuff, and Robert's come up to do our show. It's fantastic. Thanks so much, man.
I want to ask one.
The fans really like, get on that show, Dan.
I want to ask one question. What kind of threats are you and your family getting? I've heard rumors where you show up to do an interview like our show, and they come out of the woodwork.
They have, and I think sometimes.
What kind of stuff have they been saying or attempting to do?
Well, the day before jury selection, they were tweeting out our parents' address again, like Roseanne retweeted and Spike Lee had tweeted, right? And so it's something we take seriously. It's not something you can afford to be mistaken about because you could be dead wrong if you don't take them seriously. But it's something also that worries me about. Or I should say adds to my concern about the jury. I don't think anybody understands what it's like to be associated with George. Who's not his family, and I'm worried about that going forward, that these jurors will be under some kind of pressure.
Right.
In Florida, there's something called lesser included verdicts. So if you are charged with murder too, you could be convicted of manslaughter or negligent manslaughter. And sometimes juries feel pressure to do something.
Anything. Yes.
Right. So I'm worried about that because it's something that we do live with.
So if he's charged with murder too, I guess, they literally, the prosecution can just charge that and not have the risk of not getting it because there's these lesser charges that they could just convict.
I think it's a tactic. Prosecutors use all the time. They overcharge and they think that in high pressure cases like this that the jury will feel compelled to do something, to appear.
If the original charge is so big, my God, it's got to be something. So we have to. Yeah. Also odd about Florida, the 6-person jury.
Very odd. And
this is really odd. I mean, obviously we're used to a 12-person jury. What's that all about? And how do you feel? Is that advantageous to the defense or the prosecution?
The number's half, so I mean it's hard to really judge if it affects it either way. I'm glad that there's only 6 people who are going to have their lives disrupted by this, as opposed to twice that number. But I think 12 applies when there's when it's a death penalty case. It's 6, and a lot of people say, "Are you sure you know what you're saying?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure." Just wait till there's really 6 people, and it should be 12. And but I've been hearing that for a long time, for the better part of a year.
I would think you might get a more, I don't know if intimate's the word, but a little more, they're in that jury room. They're discussing things. It's a lot closer group, I think, than 12. And it would probably be easier for people to convince other people, especially if it's a limited amount, like 1 or 2 people that aren't in line with the rest of the jury.
It's bizarre, but
really
the population of Florida is very old. Getting 12 very old people.
And obviously the racial makeup is important, whether it should be or not, but it is in this case.
A lot of people are making much ado about the racial makeup, that if there are not enough, of this race or that race or whatever, and as you said, whether it should be or not, who knows, but it is important because our system relies on people respecting the outcome based on participation, not just the public attending, but the jury being reflective of the population.
Of the community.
Right.
And what is the percentage of the black percentage in the county?
I think when you talk about Seminole County generally, we're only talking about somewhere between 10 and 20%. So don't, don't quote me on that. It could be 14 or 11, or something like that. I think in Sanford, the number might be higher, but Seminole County as a whole is not, very populated with African Americans.
I know that there's been plenty of, like you said, like Roseanne retweeted something, and has it been along racial lines the way people have lined up, or no? Have you noticed any black people favoring George?
I think that the African Americans who have shown their support have done have taken an approach of kind of throwing out the old book that Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, like if this person is African American, they must be right, therefore the other one is wrong, and they're nauseated, to be quite honest, with the whole race aspect of everything. It's not just hypersensitive, but it's become this, like I was talking about before, this kind of retroactive proving that you have to do that you're not racist when someone just says that you are, and they're kind of sick of that, and the black people that have shown their support always bring that up, like we don't accomplish anything by just saying racist. That's easy.
Yeah.
We don't fix anything. We don't get to truth. We don't discuss fact. We have no dialogue that's meaningful. We just insult somebody.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't really help with anything.
Right.
So as far as the trial schedule, and I know it's pretty open-ended, what are they talking, 6 weeks about? Estimated?
It's hard to tell. The estimates now are that jury selection might take 2 weeks or thereabouts. Now, the Fry hearing was supposed to take a day.
Yeah, and that...
or part of a day, and it's ended up being this, multi-day event.
Yeah.
So these cases, there's a lot at risk here, and there's a lot of presentation to be done by the defense and the state. So things tend to expand, and go on for more than one would expect.
When you watch I was watching the sound experts and for the defense and the prosecution, and to see such stark differences between their opinions, professional opinions on the same thing.
Right.
Is that disheartening when you see that?
It's encouraging.
It's encouraging?
It's encouraging to me. I hope that, that the court rules that those experts are not allowed. But if they are allowed, too bad for the state. Those people come across, and I've heard from many, they come across as hobbyists at best. The state witnesses, and if that's what the state had to stoop to bring charges, is these quacks.
Yeah.
With their voodoo science, as it were, then they're going to have to put that before a jury, and I think it's going to look very bad.
And the old good for the goose, good for the gander thing, if you have the defense and the prosecution presenting experts on the same piece of evidence, and it's directly contradictory to each one, that right there is reasonable doubt. I mean, it kind of cancels out the evidence.
Right. Well, what the Fry hearing does is it determines what's called the admissibility based on methodology. Is the method used to determine whether this is expert opinion or not, or to analyze a piece of evidence? Is the methodology behind it sound science? And I think what's resonating here and what's emerging is that you cannot analyze screams. You can analyze voice.
Right.
But when you have a scream, and you have a scream over telephone, and there's all these variables from a phone inside a home that the speaker could have been, or the microphone could have been pointing any which way, or it could have been on the face or not on the face.
Now, because that scream is being heard from somebody that was on the phone with 911.
Right.
So the scream is coming into the house in some way, shape, or form, through a window, a door, whatever it is, into the phone, onto the 911 tapes.
Right.
Now, how, in any way, shape, or form, can anybody think that you can decipher who that is?
Well, certainly the FBI can't. or have not been able to. You know, certainly the state of Florida has not been able to, but there seems to be an expert for the state who seems to make a lot of money, who's making what one defense expert called imaginary accusations about what he hears. So,
I got to be honest with you. I honestly think that if this case wasn't so racially charged and so much hadn't been brought out in the media and people using it for their own devices, I think this would have never come to a trial. And if it did, I think it would be a slam dunk acquittal.
Right. Yeah. I think the media likes to pat themselves on the back, and they are under the impression that, but for their action, you know, but for them.
Look at what we did.
Look at what we we brought justice, you know, and it would not have been this way if we did not get involved. And what actually happened was the law stopped working 45 days later when George was arrested. Self-defense statute exists so that when people are forced to defend themselves, their lives are not screwed, for lack of a better word.
Right, yeah.
Because they defended themselves. And that's the way it should be. You know, if you defend your life and you're justified in doing so, there should be some kind of standard that says, we can prove that's not true, and therefore you're arrested. That
you shouldn't have to. Yeah, you shouldn't have to go broke. You shouldn't have to sacrifice everything you have in your life just to prove that you were right in the first place.
Right.
I was saying before during the break that it's a very important trial. I think when you have racially charged trials like this, it's very important that it's done right. Every trial's important that it's done right, but when something is so out there and in the public eye, it can be very discouraging if things go wrong. People lose faith in the system. It makes people very cynical. So I think this really has to play out based on evidence and true justice, regardless of what people's emotions are on either side. I think it's very important.
I think it was playing out that way in the early days.
Right,
I think the people who were investigating it, despite what the NAACP would have said at the time, that there was no investigation whatsoever, you know, that's obviously false. But I think those people were giving that message fairly consistently, that there is no probable cause, and that in this country we charge when there's probable cause, and George had not committed murder or any crime, you know. And so I think that the people of Sanford deserve to hear that message repeated by the special prosecutor instead of hearing, we're going to charge with murder because all of these people here are incompetent. They were not incompetent. They were honoring their oath.
Yeah.
It's such a hard, you know, it's like I see, like, why did, because my question about George was, why did he, not the fact that I wanted one operator saying go back, like, I know that's all nonsense, but if he got out with the gun and he had the pistol, how did Trayvon get on him? That's always been a point.
I heard your spot of saying, like, if you have a gun, how could you lose control of a situation? And I was telling Anthony before that I think that if you don't carry a gun, you have a different expectation about what that means. And I think that in this country we have really 50 sets of laws that govern the expectations that we have of, you know, what does it mean to carry a gun
based on where you live, where you are, what town, city, state. I mean, there are so many different laws. Whenever they say, well, we need to do something about gun laws, it's like you can't, they vary so much from state to state and city to city that you can't just cover it with one thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can get assaulted and have a gun. If you don't feel your life is being threatened, you don't use your gun.
It is in fact illegal or felonious in some situations.
There's
to expose
brandishing.
Your pistol.
You're not allowed to do it. I think people that carry guns, for the most part, and they should be, are the most educated people about guns. Whenever I get into a Second Amendment argument with somebody that doesn't know anything about guns, I wonder why they're even arguing. I would never attempt to start talking about race cars with a race car driver and profess to know more than they do about it. And I think that's the same thing with the Second Amendment issue. But again, emotion gets in. People feel compelled to repeat stuff, no matter how inaccurate that they've heard. People are under the assumption that no matter where you are, you can walk into a gun store and without any kind of check buy a fully automatic machine gun and just go out along your merry way. And they will argue that point to you, regardless of how educated you are on the fact. So I think when you hear things like, well, he gets out, he has a gun, this guy's unarmed, how did this happen? Obviously he's in the wrong because he had the gun, he didn't.
Right.
No, it doesn't work that way. And as somebody who carries a gun, you realize what the responsibilities are, how far you can advance the confrontation based on what's coming back at you.
Right. I think a word that comes to mind is escalation.
Escalation.
You know, an escalation of force.
Escalation of force.
Violence, and when you finally have to make
that decision, deadly physical force. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's when the gun becomes exposed or relevant, and never before that.
And it wasn't. As we hear in testimony and whatnot, what the police were told and what evidence shows based on how close he was when he was shot, it seemed to be there was an altercation. The gun was not brought out until the one shot was fired, that when George felt his life was being in imminent danger. So if he got out and started waving the gun around, or
I mean, that's just absurd. Somebody who calls the police that much is not going to be.
Yeah, why would you call the police if you're out just looking for gun trouble? None of it really adds up, and I think a sensible jury will eventually see that, and I hope for the best for your brother and your family. Again, what website can people go to if they want to kick in a little support?
It's the only website to go to is gzdefensefund.com. That's
Great.
The only website, and there's other fake sites that are like, for example, .this or .that, but gzdefensefund.com is the only one that links directly to the trust for his defense.
Yeah. So what do you got going on the next couple of days looking like for you?
Fox, CNN, back to Florida, and we'll see from there. I'm definitely concluding. I mean, I think this will be the last time I'm on the radio until George's acquittal, because I think that I need to insulate him from any kind of harm that could come his way, or anything I could say that's inflammatory, prejudicial, controversial, or what have you. I'd like to remain vocal about people who are railroaded, especially as it relates to the Second Amendment or race after his case, and there'll be a time for that. But now our objective is seeing him acquitted. So I have to be very, very careful.
Robert,
in the coming
just
days.
DM me the stuff. I'll put it right out on Twitter. I'll put it out under my own name. It'll be great. We'll work as a team.
So you got to get him out of there.
Yeah. You got Fox coming up,
yes,
going over there?
Absolutely.
Great. And your lawyer buddy.
What?
Yeah.
It's Chris at cjplaw.com.
Chris at cjplaw.com.
Right.
You're a fan of the show. I like this guy.
Looks like a lunatic.
I love him.
Looks insane.
It's fantastic. Best of luck, man, and
Thank you so
give your
much
brother
for
my
having
support.
me. I so much
absolutely.
appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah.